There. All right. Now we're recording. So great. And again, I assume people will come along the way. So I am Patty Konstantakis, the Director of Adult Learning Initiatives at Digital Promise. And with me today is Christina Luke, who is the Director of Program and Product Evaluation, also here at Digital Promise. And honestly, most of what's here around this EdTech pilot framework is really Christina's baby. And so I'm excited to have her be a part of this today. So like I said, we're going to try to do things somewhat interactively, but we'll tell you a little bit about us. Now, some of you, again, know about us. We are Digital Promise, and kind of what we do is we work and kind of invest at the intersection of educators, developers, and researchers. And our mission really is to spur innovation in education for all learners, which is a nice broad mission as we see it. But we have a specific focus on technology and research. And so we do a lot of our work is at the intersection of educators, product developers, and researchers. And I'll move on, I suppose, for the next slide. Thanks. Christina's running the slides, so I'm sitting here. At Digital Promise, we kind of believe in four things. We believe in the power of networks, really, to connect us and our ideas. And we have a wonderful network here amongst adult learning with our beacons and several other with researchers and developers. We have a great network here that we've been building for a while. We believe in the power of story excuse me, just one sec there. We believe in the power of story to really sort of amplify all of the work that we're doing. And we believe in the power of research to really ground our work. And we believe in the power of engagement, in particular with our students and our learners, right? We feel like if we can use technology and all of this to really engage our learners in a great learning experience, then we've really done, hopefully, the service that we're looking to provide. Next slide. Over time, and I kind of mentioned this with as I referred to Christina and this being her baby, but we have a big focus here at Digital Promise on research. And one of the pieces that I think has been really interesting for us has been our work on what we've called marketplace research, and a lot of it's been so far focused on the K-12 market, but really what it has been, this effort has been an effort to help schools and districts make more informed decisions on what technology to use in their programs. And this has really been the case, sort of in K-12 and in adult ed, I would say too, is that people do pilots all the time, but they're kind of ad hoc. They just kind of think, oh, I'll just try it. And while that's great, it also doesn't quite, there are ways in which that ad hocness confuses things actually sometimes more than others. And so the folks here, and Christina will tell you a lot more about it, we've done some work over the last 4 years to really help systematize pilots. And so I have a big belief in this. And I think that some of the research that these guys have done sort of points to the reason why it's valuable to do some of this. So we've started to do some of this work in adult ed as well. A lot of people tell us that they don't really know how to get started with a pilot. So what we've wanted to do today was kind of take this hour to share with you some of the tools that we've developed and help you kind of started to think about how to do something a little more systematic, not so ad hoc, really to, and the basis for most of this is to sort of help you set goals, kind of understand what's working and what's not ultimately. Next slide. I want to share with you a link in here. Let me just go find it in the chat. I'm going to share a link to one of our what we call one of our pilot study briefs. And I'm going to paste it in here real quick. Hang on. Oops, sorry. Too many windows open. This link here, if you guys can go to it, hopefully those of you who are on the video side of it, if you're on the phone, sorry about that. But what this is a brief that one of our pilot sites in the K-12 world put together after doing a pilot. And what you see here, I think, is, once I saw one of these, I went, this is awesome information. This is the kind of information that I think all of us would love to read ourselves when we're thinking about trying to adopt a particular product or whatever and trying to use it. So what this brief does, a part of it is here on the slide, but you can look at the whole thing on the link. But it basically gives kind of basic, the product info. So this one happens to be around Achieve 3000, which I know there are several adult ed programs around that are actually using Achieve 3000. So I thought this was a really interesting one. But it tells you about the product. It's going to tell you about the context. In this case, it's the district, but in our case, it would be whoever the, whoops.
Oh.
Sorry, hang on.
It looks like, Patty, you dropped the link into the Google Drive, excuse me, version of this, and it is publicly available on the EdTech Pilot Framework website.
Let's find that.
So if you go to edtech.digitalpromise.com and then click on Pilot Study Briefs.
Darn, because I have the others. Let me fix my Google Drive here in a second.
So while Patty is doing that,
I'll keep telling you more about it.
I'll kind of tell you more about the pilot study briefs, right? So as Patty was saying, we started working with K-12 schools and districts to understand how they were doing pilots in places where evidence was being used in EdTech decision-making. What was their process? How were they approaching it? And what information was useful to them to be able to share with their stakeholders, to be able to show school boards and purchasing teams and things like that. And through those investigations, we kind of followed alongside schools and districts that were doing this work.
Try this link now. I just put a new one.
We came up with these categories of information. It's only a 2-page brief, but it gives really important information about the context of where the tool was being used and with what kind of students and in what for what period of time. And that information we found is really valuable to be able to generalize any of the findings, because it's hard to trust research about EdTech products if you don't feel like the students that were involved in the study really mirror the case that you're dealing with.
Right. Okay, I pasted in that link. Does it work now?
Yeah,
hopefully it does.
It works.
Okay, thanks, David. Great. Because I have another one coming up that I was like, oh, wait, I didn't set that right. So that's great. Thank you. So kind of my goal here would be to see a lot of us in adult learning produce these kinds of study briefs as well, because I think they're super, super useful. And as you guys will see them, they're just great. So our goal, I think, in the end of all of this, not the end, but our goal here is to help people also get this kind of information as well, that I think is super useful. Next slide. That was kind of a preamble to what we want to try to do with this session today. We just did the introduction. The next piece we want to do is just kind of walk you through what this EdTech pilot framework looks like and what the steps are. Then what we want to do is have you guys do some reflection on kind of the strengths and opportunities within your organization with respect to these particular steps in this framework. Then we want to actually talk a little bit about how to set goals, pilot goals for your organization, and actually have you do a little exercise with that. Then we'll also come back to, okay, now how do we think about aligning some of the data? How is it you think about gathering the data to those goals? What would match? And then we'll have a chance to give you feedback, have you guys give us, ask questions, in particular of Christina, and so on. Next slide. All right,
cool.
So
I started telling you a little bit about the history of the marketplace research effort and kind of how we came to develop this EdTech pilot framework, which is what we're going to be digging into. But we really heard from district leaders that a big challenge they were facing was around education technology procurement and knowing which tools and products were going to work with their students. The evidence that existed wasn't something that they felt like they could trust or that was relevant to their context. And they weren't sure how to make these decisions, in ways that ensured that they were making the right ones. So we started this initiative with the goal of trying to increase the amount of evidence in the EdTech marketplace. And we decided to do that by supporting educators and education leaders in making evidence-based decisions by going through a rapid cycle EdTech evaluation. So these pilots aren't lengthy multi-year studies. They're fast. They occur over several months maybe. And we provide some of the support in going through the process and collecting data and reporting out through things like that pilot study brief so that it's less onerous. And our hope is that by supporting folks in doing these rapid pilots, then we can also populate the field with more of these pilot study briefs, more information, so that not everyone has to start at the beginning with a pilot. They can pick up a pilot study brief and say, this looks similar to my context. I think I can learn from this, and maybe I don't have to go through a whole pilot before making a decision. So the EdTech pilot framework, as we were saying, is 8 steps. It's a system for conducting an EdTech pilot. And we developed it by working with researchers in higher education, with district leaders, with product developers to figure out what the best practices were for conducting these short cycle evaluations. And we found that, the most important steps are actually the ones at the very beginning. Being really clear about the need that you have, that you're trying to solve for with this product or program is essential. That's definitely the first step, is the most important. And then finding the solution, the product or program or programs that you'd like to compare against each other, planning for the implementation with product developers, with other researchers, and identifying who all the right stakeholders are to be involved in a project like this is really important. Training and implementing the tool with teachers and students and learners is, of course, very important and often overlooked. Then, of course, the data collection analysis, how you use the analysis to help negotiate a purchase. And then what we think is a really important step is sharing out through the pilot study brief so that others can learn from your success. So we're going to go into a piece here now that is a little bit more interactive. We'd like to invite you to take a look at this EdTech pilot framework. Patty just posted the link into the chat. And be critical of it. Review those 8 steps and think about, are there areas here of these 8 steps where you think your organization is particularly strong and does those steps very well when examining EdTech purchases or other program implementations? And are there certain steps that you think you could do better? And we'd love to, just give you a few minutes to reflect on that and then have a discussion about, if any of these steps of the process resonate with you and where you think you might need more support. That really helps inform our work and how we do future webinars like this, but also other activities to help support the space. So please just take a few minutes and look at the EdTech pilot framework. Also, feel free to just explore it generally. If you click on any of those 8 steps, it'll take you to a step page that includes video testimonials from educators about why that step is important, as well as a number of different free tools and resources to help you through that step. So if you're curious about what any of the steps mean, all you have to do is click on them and they'll give you a lot more information. So we will give you until about 20 minutes after the hour to take a look at this, and then have your comments ready, because we will open up the lines for conversation. And if anyone has any questions, please just shoot us a chat message.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great, David. Um, let's give it like one more minute, David, and then I will. You can unmute
You're
yourself
first.
and you can go first.
Yeah, feel free to queue up any comments too in the chat.
Great.
Thanks, Mary. Okay.
Okay. So, David, maybe you can. Do you want me to unmute you, or do you want to unmute yourself?
I think I'm unmuted.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
You can. Yes. Thanks.
Okay, good. So first, I like the framework. I think these are the right steps. Makes a lot of sense. I think this would work with some minor modifications in the adult basic skills education field. And I'm thinking of two contexts, so maybe I should introduce myself in terms of those contexts. I'm the moderator of the Links Integrating Technology Group. Links is a professional development system for adult basic skills educators, sponsored by the US Department of Education, managed by the Manhattan Strategy Group. It's free. There are lots of wonderful resources, including a large community of practice, and within that is one group called Integrating Technology, which I moderate. The other, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. The other context is a very interesting project that's happening right now this year and may continue if they get continued funding in the state of Illinois. It's the Illinois Digital Literacy Lab project. And this project has recruited teachers, adult ed ESL, and adult basic skills teachers, adult secondary education teachers from Illinois who are interested in integrating technology. They had actually a lot of applications. They narrowed it down to about 30 people. They have a handful of administrators part of the project as well. And my relationship to this is as a subject matter expert for one of the cohorts of the project. So having said all that, here's what I think. First of all, I mentioned that the framework might need minor modifications. It's certainly possible that adult education programs that are sponsored by school districts might want to do this for their program within the school district context. But most are not necessarily with school districts. Some are sponsored by community colleges, community-based organizations, corrections institutions, volunteer literacy programs, and so forth. So my thought is maybe for the adult ed field, the context might be the program or the school, the adult school itself, not the whole district. And even it's possible, I think, to do this with a single teacher or to have a group of teachers. So that's what led me to think about the integrating technology group. Links does have an opportunity for forming what are called micro groups within the 11 groups. And so, for example, we've had a micro group evaluating apps and online software. There's a group that may be forming, we'll wait to see if it's approved, on using Google tools. I could see a group forming to do exactly this, to do these pilot study briefs. And then I also think within the context of the Illinois Digital Literacy Lab, that I suppose it might be possible to do this for the third sprint, which would be coming up in the late spring, early summer this year, or if they get continued funding to do this next year. I think it fits both of these contexts really well.
Yeah, great. Those are awesome suggestions, David. I know the folks over at Digital Literacy Lab too, and I was like, I hadn't thought about this specific thing. I thought about other things to suggest for them, but that's a great suggestion as ways to think about. Um, I think in some ways, yeah, I agree with you. There's some adaptation and you'll see a couple of as we go. A few of the tools I've already adapted just a little bit by mostly just changing wording for lack of any other way, just to sort of but yeah, I think there are ways in which we could learn a lot um, around what we would need to adapt and how to modify just a bit to make it even easier for folks to use within adult ed as well. So yeah, thanks for that. That's really, really interesting. Vinod, it sounds like you had some thoughts as well.
Yes, can you hear me, Patty?
Yep.
Yeah.
So we've started, I think, over 40 adult ed pilots in the last 6 months around the country. So everything from community college and adult school down to refugee centers and, workplace. And so we've gone through pretty much these 8 steps a few times out of those 40. So we kind of have some experience in this. I think what I would say, my biggest comments are on the plan, data, and summarized steps. And that is that very often we start pilots very informally. That means we somehow get a teacher interested and, an instructor. And for want of a better word, we sneak into the program. They put some learners on because they're scared, maybe to tell the boss, or sometimes they tell the boss and everyone's involved. But until some learners actually start making good progress and some gains, usually people don't want to run it all the way up to the top, if you know what I mean. They want to get some confidence in the program themselves. So I was going to say that we often don't get into that step 3 plan because it scares them away. The more we approach this as a big formal study, the less they want to talk to us. So a lot of the times these steps come in after the fact. Midland Need to Read in Texas, just had an article in the local paper about that program. And I think in the beginning it was to put your toe in the water. And now we're going back sort of after the fact and maybe talking about doing some more collecting data or summarizing it in a study, in a paper. And it seems like all the papers we've done, which look very much like your Achieve one, have all been done kind of after the fact. So the second thing is the data. We get a lot of data internally, of course, and that's fine. It's external data that's the problem. That means getting them to either do a survey or share the numbers of, anything we can't get ourselves. The best data we get is usually an interview 2 months later or something that we have do where we talk to them on the phone and just write stuff informally down. But we've had a lot more issue saying, hey, do this, have all the learners take a survey or, collect data on their own. I even had a huge Will-funded adult ed program here in San Diego that called me in to help their GED program for people who failed math. And they couldn't even tell me what percentage fail. They couldn't, even very basic data like that, they don't collect. So, and the third thing would be the summarizing. It's fantastic. It takes a lot of time, but it's fantastic if Digital Promise is actually, going to get involved in that. I think we spend good money on that, and we probably do it in 1 out of 30 pilots. So it's very rare that we get to share it out to the public. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. And I see a couple from Carol, a couple others. So Carol, you talked a little bit. The first thing you posted was thinking about products. We're going to talk about that in just a second as we go through. But I'm seeing also that you started a pilot that you then turned into a recognized class. Do you want to share just a brief something about that out loud, or is your comment in the chat plenty for you?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can, yes.
All right. Yeah, I was working with, OTAN out of
Mm-hmm.
Sacramento, and they have the DLAC distance learning program. And when we did our WASC year before last, students all asked why don't they have work to do at home on their smartphones or other digital devices. And so we started a mobile ESL enrichment program, and we have 2 classes running right now, one at night and one in the morning. And the students are intermediate and advanced so far. And 2 different teachers. We use slightly different products to teach our students, but it seems to be picking up and growing as each session passes. Of course, our main problem is keeping the students going in the class because they get involved in their outside activities and their class problems. And, so keeping them working in the class is the big problem. It takes a lot more time than the school district is willing to recognize, but we're willing to do it.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like you've hit on something that is definitely something folks want out there. So that's great. Okay, we'll keep going. So now what I want to do, I need to go find this link for you guys real quick. Another link to a. This is one of the tools that is in the pilot framework, but I've adapted it just a little bit. I'm going to put this link here. It is what we want to do is help you guys, whoever's here, and then again, this is part of this framework of like thinking about setting goals. So like the important thing to do as you start in a pilot, and all of you have kind of already said this, is start with the end in mind, right? So if you think about what are the outcomes we're looking what are the outcomes we're looking for? What is our current vision? How are we trying to think about what we want for our learners, et cetera? Then the obvious first place to start in my mind, but it not always for other people, is how about we set a goal and then everything else from there is going to align for this. So that link that I just posted in there, and Christina can probably talk more about this, but the link that I just posted is a worksheet that you guys can use with your organizations or each teacher, or we can share broadly because all of this is open source and super shareable. But it really is designed to sort of take you through that process of thinking through your goals, right? Do you want to add to that? Or?
Sure, yeah. So like Vinod was saying, sometimes pilots start because educator hears about a cool new tool and wants to try it, and that's great. But it's also important to make sure that you have a real clear sense of what success is going to look like for trying that kind of tool. And ideally, we work in a space where everything is aligned and we have a very clear vision and very clear strategic priorities for our learners and for our educators. But the reality is that sometimes we start somewhere in the middle and then have to go backwards. So just like we think about design for learning, curriculum design, things like that, we want to make sure that the goals for using any new innovation, whether it's a product, a program, anything, have a link to some kind of overarching goal that we have as an organization, as a classroom, as an educator, and that those goals are informing how we're measuring success of that tool. So we find that there's the most confusion and kind of muddy waters in pilots where the goals were never fully articulated and don't link back to any kind of broader strategic initiatives or priorities. So this worksheet, as Patty was saying, is just meant to be helpful for teams to sit down and discuss some of these points together and see how there's a common understanding of what the goals of the pilot are and what success looks like.
Yep. So now if you guys look at that, what we'd hoped to do, sort of watching time. So I'd love for any of you who want to, as you look at that worksheet, maybe there's something in there that you guys could share in terms of like around your goals and your visions from your particular organization or yeah, your organization or your team or yourself in terms of that. Does anybody want to talk about that a little bit? Because what we found as we've done this webinar a couple of times is it's really interesting to hear kind of where visions intersect, because there's plenty of them, because all of us are in a lot of ways working with some of the same learners, but sort of where those visions align and where sometimes there's some interesting differences. So if anybody would love to, would talk a little bit about kind of either their vision or their notion of this, or comment on the worksheet itself as to how useful or how it may or may not be for you guys. You can look at it a little bit if you'd like.
Patty, I have a comment on the worksheet. This is David Rosen. It's logical. The categories make a lot of sense to me. I completely agree that it's important before you start any kind of pilot like this to be very clear about what your goals are before you select the technology. There is one step in the middle, which is product information. And what's deceptive about this is that a lot of teachers and programs don't really know what are the relevant products, particularly relevant products for their goals. And I don't actually know of any resource in our field that organizes products by goals. So that it would be very helpful to have a resource like that. There are some efforts to put together resources. For example, I have one called the Literacy List, and it's been going for about 20 years. I update it all the time. And it has primarily websites rather than tools, but it's organized by ESL and ABE and math and so forth. But there's a new one that Jeff Gumas and Jennifer Madrell are actively working on OER resources. And so that there's another one. Again, it's not, as far as I know, it's not organized by goals, but it might be useful to put together some collections of resources and then perhaps actually look at that in terms of actual goals that programs have and organize those tools and resources by goals.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And my next slide is going to address almost exactly that, except you added a lovely twist to it, which is the goals piece, and I hadn't thought about that, so that's really interesting. Anybody else have comments before I go on? Any other thoughts about this and how it may or may not be useful to you in your work? Mm-hmm. You're supposed to wade through the silence.
Hi, is it all right if I just speak
yes,
up?
Please do.
Okay. Well, in addition to my online class that I told you about, this is Carol speaking, by the way.
Yes,
I also have a blended learning class for high beginners, and it's really a problem trying to find the products that are at a cost that I can use them freely with my students without having my students use the same product over and over and over again until they're bored with it. And I would really appreciate someone giving us a list that has those goals, because that's what we need, especially if they're OER products where my district is not going to complain about the amount of money I'm spending. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the things that I would wonder, and it's a little bit of work we'd have to figure out, like, what are the right ways to think about those goals across all of our organizations? Do you know what I mean? Because somebody already mentioned, actually it was you, Carol, you already mentioned that one of the biggest problems is retention, keeping folks in class, right? So in some ways, how do you say, okay, well, this product is great at, it engages students. We've seen more around, so I'm not sure how we're going to do that yet, but we may have to, there's some some thoughts, some interesting thoughts that would help people. Maybe it's more like testimonials that people can say, you know what, we've seen this work in these situations, or something to that effect as we go.
If I could add another comment, it surprises me that the things I think are really engaging for the students and they'd have fun with, they just leave alone. And let me give you an example. I use Newsela with my adult learners. They're high beginning, as I said. And then I take the vocabulary out of our Newsela articles and put it into Spelling City and ask them to go to Spelling City to practice it.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first week, they loved it, and they played all the games. And then after the first week, the thing that I thought would really be engaging for them, all those cute little games and that Spelling City has, just lost their interest, and all they wanted to do was either Burlington or we have another online workbook or the Newsela, and the games just passed away.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Can I jump in here for a second, Patty?
Sure.
To respond to Carol, this is not an unusual problem to start with, but I wanted to make sure you knew about some interesting resources. You may have heard of the Adult Literacy X Prize. There are now 8 semi-finalist teams that are competing in 3 national field test in 3 cities: Philadelphia, Dallas, and Los Angeles. And actually, Vinod is the head of one of those teams, and he could speak about his product in detail. But I encourage you to look at these. As far as I know, all 8 are free, at least at this point. I think eventually they won't be, but during the X Prize competition, they're free and available. And as I have looked at them, I think some of them are highly engaging. And so you might want to do that. And by the way, right now, this week, there's a discussion taking place with 5 of the 8 semifinalists in the Links Integrating Technology group. And so if that's something you're interested in exploring, you might join this week and ask questions directly of the 5 development teams or the director of the Adult Literacy X Prize competition. Or if you can't do it this week, it's asynchronous, and you can go on and see what the questions were that I and others asked, and how the teams responded to those questions. There's just a lot of information about the apps that's coming out in this discussion.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I moved on to the next slide so a couple of things. People always ask this question, and we all have the same issue of like, there's just not enough products out there that we would like to use. So here are two resources. One is the EdSurge Product Index. If you just search EdSurge Product Index, they have a list of about 20 or so. They're slightly dated, but they're the bigger products that are completely appropriate for adults, etc. So you might look there. And then we have, and that's the link I just pasted in there, which is our kind of product directory. Again, I'd say it's not exhaustive. It's just a list. Some of the X Prize folks are in that list. But I will also say that we're working with the EdTech Center at World Education to enhance this product directory. So we are actually looking to put together a more extensive explanation, group things differently. Like, we hadn't really thought about goals, but I think what we might do is just add a field in some of the description that we have. But there will be more of a description of what each of the products are, et cetera. We are currently right in the midst of working on this. We expect to have this out probably by midsummer or so. So check back with us, but we'll also do a big launch on that. We realize that it's a big issue, and so we want to be able to actually help in the ways where we're situated in this world, between those developers and those researchers and educators, be able to kind of help with that particular problem in this way too. So look for that. These are right now. These are folks there. I wouldn't say, Carol, that they're all free at this particular point on our list, but they are products that we have seen be used appropriately with adults, which I think is great. All right, we're moving on. Another tool we wanted you guys to get a look at. Let me grab the link and post it in there. This link, maybe Christina can talk about it while
Sure.
I do this.
So this just builds on the last discussion around goal setting to then align the right kind of data collection activities. So we hear a lot that it's hard to figure out, beyond the data that you might get out of an EdTech product itself, what other forms of data should be gathered, and how to make sure that the pilot goal was met. Sometimes, as you've kind of shared anecdotally, you'll think that something is going to be really engaging for students and then find out it's not, and then wonder, why didn't this show up in the data somehow, or what am I missing? So this next piece is supposed to help focus your thinking around the types of data that could be collected and which ones might do the best job at answering the questions that you have. So first of all, we have just some examples of data sources depending on what your pilot goal is. So if your goal were around student learning, you can all imagine the kinds of data you might want to gather related to student achievement in certain areas. If your goal was around student engagement, you can imagine that there might be different kinds of data sources you would be interested in. So here's some examples. For engagement, you might be more curious about some kind of qualitative data from learners and from teachers around how easy the tool was to use, how it created more kind of attitudes around being excited about learning, or behaviors of sticking with something. Those might be signs of engagement. Whereas if you were thinking about learning, you might want to, look at assessment data and that kind of thing. Also, the importance of trying to include comparison groups is something that we should note. This is always very, very difficult in education at any level. So understanding that it's not always possible, but to the extent that it could be possible, even if it's one group is using one tool and another group is using another tool, it's helpful to be able to see some changes relative to a group that is not undergoing the same intervention. Okay, so that link that Patty posted, that's a tongue twister, is called the Data Goal Alignment document, and this is where you consider the different sources of data that you might gather, and the one side of it is around the questions to ask when you're having those conversations with different stakeholder groups, and the other side of it is around linking the goal that you've identified in that previous document to the questions that you have and to the data that you want to collect. So this is another team-focused document for discussion and brainstorming together around who's going to be responsible for collecting or sharing what, and how is that going to be helpful in answering an overall question about an intervention's success. So how are we doing on time? Do we have a minute to kind of react to this?
We do, I think so, okay. Yeah. And again, in some of the other forums that we've discussed this with folks, they're very interested in kind of that questions that guide the data and data gathering and review plan. I think what we've heard is, what was helpful is, yes, that's the right, David, is this the right URL for which data aligns with my goals? Right?
Yep, data goal line.
Yep, just keep, so that.
I think so.
I clicked it and it does the same thing. Just go to the second page of it, David, probably. You got to scroll down.
We're showing the screenshot of the second page, but the first page is where you start with the goal and then follow it through.
So go to the second page. but yeah, so what we've heard a lot is kind of this, fear is too big a word for what I think is going on, but it's kind of some discomfort with like, okay, well, how do I know what data to gather to sort of answer some of our questions, and that seems ominous to people to sort of think through that, and that some of these guiding questions are I don't know, comforting, but just make it a little bit more accessible, I think, for folks to think about. So curious about your reaction to that too.
I have one comment, David again, and that's about the data collection. Some of the tools and products have a data management system built into it, like some of the apps that I mentioned before. Actually, some of the products that you've listed in the Digital Promise resource directory have built-in systems. So it would be good to as you're describing various products, when they do have a management information system, to include a paragraph on that and what kind of data are available to teachers, because that would align very well with what you're trying to do in the data collection step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about any other of you who are kind of in the midst of pilots? Vinod, for example, would any of this help some of your folks help you collect data? You know what I mean? Because you mentioned about data before.
Yeah, I mean, this all rings very familiar to what we do, and I like the list a lot. I think we're gonna use it in the future. Because you're right, you kind of need to know what to ask the top people,
Right.
And again, I think when you get in the room with both the director and the instructor, or when you get in the Zoom conference with them, this is exactly the kind of thing we could use to ask them questions. We do collect a lot of data ourselves, and the biggest problem we have is that data of interviews and more informal data on the instructors. So yeah, no, I think this will help us a lot.
Great, interesting.
All right. So this all kind of leads into then how do I collect the data? Once I decide the kind of data I want to be able to have, how do I find the right instrument to collect it? And so we have under the collect data step of the EdTech pilot framework a number of different surveys and classroom observations and focus group protocols and things like that that could be adapted to make it more relevant to whatever study you're doing. But we do recommend trying to find existing instruments whenever possible that have been validated and where the instruments have been piloted before just throwing questions out there. Because it's always disappointing when a small change you realize could be interpreted very differently for your learners or your educators, and that threw off the whole data collection effort. So, but if anyone else has kind of ideas for where to find data collection instruments, if you want to go above and beyond product information or learning data to get more qualitative data or survey data from participants, where you go to find that information, we'd be happy to highlight those here.
Yes. Any other thought around
This is Carol. As I put in the chat, I only use stuff that has internal data collection, but then collecting the data from the various programs I use and putting that together in a reasonable way is where I think I really fall down on the job and need some kind of training or assistance.
So you just opened the door to the need for data interoperability in this space, which is another thing that we're very interested in. Having to take CSV files from lots of different sources and mash them together and try to make sense of them shouldn't be how we spend our time. And so hopefully in the future, there will be more ways that these data sources talk to each other and make it easier for interpretation and reporting. But that is kind of a blue sky goal right now.
That one, yeah, for sure. But yes, your dilemma is not an unusual one. That is one of the issues of like, how is it that I'm using 3 or 4 different things and I want to make sure that I'm getting a full picture of my student. There are definitely many manual ways to do that. But I might just encourage you to, pick the 1 or 2 and make sure in those cases, which you're probably already doing, but in those cases, what does that tell you? What kind of picture does that give you about your learner and about that particular piece of technology and how it matches the goals that you've had from the beginning? But yeah, Christina's right. We have a whole another effort going on about thinking about how do we get our systems all to talk to each other, and how do we get our product developers to kind of work within a system. And what that can just mean is a really simple kind of set of standard ways of thinking about certain kinds of data and exporting that in the same way each time. It shouldn't be extremely difficult, but anyway, it's an effort going on at this point as well.
All right, so the things we didn't touch on today, but that you could still check out are the additional steps of the pilot framework that we didn't cover around data analysis and decision making and things like that. Also, I mentioned there are videos with best practices, and we'd invite you to check out those. We didn't talk about this much here today, but we also offer some educator micro-credentials for people who are engaging in pilots and want to earn credit for the competencies that they're developing in these research areas. Those are also highlighted on the EdTech Pilot Framework site. And of course, if anyone is doing pilots and would like to share their results and get their information out there, please connect with me or Patty, and we can post your results as a pilot study brief on our website.
Yes, please. That would be great. And David, I think the suggestion that you had of like maybe a microgroup along the way for links, and maybe there's some work we could do kind of in conjunction with that to support some of this, and maybe start to see some of these pilot briefs would be great. But no, it sounds like you two might be able to use this as a format. This is a template actually that we again can adapt just a bit for folks to just start to fill out, right? Because sometimes even people don't have a good sense of like, how should I share it? And so having a way of just like, here, I can fill this template out is also a useful thing for them too. So what else? David, you look like you unmuted.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I have actually 2 comments. One is I love this. I think this is terrific. I think it has tremendous applicability and importance for adult basic skills education.
Okay.
But I do have one concern, and that is that, and Patty, you certainly know this, Christina, you may not. In the adult basic ed field, 80% of the teachers are part-time, and they are a vastly underfunded group of people. They do not earn what public school teachers earn anywhere near it, unless, of course, they're in a school district. So it would be very helpful to move this forward if there were stipends for teachers. Mm-hmm. And in a dream world, if there was a technology budget, so that after they had done the report and decided on a particular technology, whether it's hardware or software or both, they actually had the money to purchase it. Mm-hmm. This is one reason, by the way, to connect with the Illinois Digital Learning Lab, because both of those are in place in that project.
Yeah,
it's unusual though.
Yeah, that's a good point. I actually, David, had put together a couple of grant proposals that I'm floating around that are specifically have these kinds of things attached to them. That what I was hoping to do is do, small grants to different kinds of providers out there who would then engage in actual pilot studies with us on purpose and systematically, et cetera. So I've got a couple thoughts around how to do that, just, in general, trying to figure out where to float those grant proposals to would be also useful.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah. What else? We were like just right at our time. Anybody else have thoughts? Like I said, I will actually follow up with all of the links to these resources that we put in here and the recording of this. And, would love for you guys to share with others, etc. as well. In fact, widely share, please, because I believe in the importance of this. Like I keep saying it's my thing for this year. To 2018, I'm like all about I want to see people do some really good, interesting pilots and share what they're learning with the rest of us. That's I'm super interested in that.
Patty, is that Achieve 3000 template? You just said something about it. I just want to be clear. Is that something that Digital Promise is going to basically? Is that a format that we should use to submit a pilot to you for dissemination, or what?
There's a submission form, a pilot study brief submission form on our EdTech pilot framework website, and it just basically has those fields that you fill in, and that's how you submit your evidence if you'd like to share it in a pilot study brief.
Yep. All righty. Well, then we're right at time. I thank you guys for attending, and I hope this was helpful. It was great. Thank you for all the participation, you guys. This was great. I think we learned a bit from you guys as well, too, which is great today. So again, thanks so much, and we'll hopefully see you on another one of our webinars soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.